Welcome to Ship Talk. That's ship with a P. Don't demonetize me, YouTube. The Xwing. Arguably, it's the most iconic ship in all of Star Wars. Second only to potentially the Imperial class Star Destroyer or the Millennium Falcon. Actually, the Falcon is probably more iconic, but, like I say, it's second. It was definitely the most well-rounded starfighter to see service with Rebel squadrons during the Galactic Civil War. Arguably, in fact, it's the best fighter of the entire Galactic Civil War. But what made the Xwing so effective? Well, that's what this video is about. Note that because this is a ship talk, there's no script for this production. I've prepared some talking points, and that's really about it. So be prepared for a level of rambling on my part in this video as I roughly adhere to my notes, but veer off on occasion on tangents because I can't be stopped. To start things off with, I think that we should establish what the Xwing is. So, the Xwing is what in current parlance you might term a strike fighter. It's a sort of does everything. It's very, very good against enemy fighters. It's well armed enough that it can be used to attack larger targets, so it poses a threat against enemy corvettes. It can attack hardpoints on enemy capital ships. You can use it in a ground attack role, all of those different things. So it has multiple missions. It's also quite long-ranged, so it can conduct attacks at distance. This is in contrast to a lot of Imperial fighters that are generally very specifically tailored to fill a certain role. So the TIE LN is very much a naval space superiority fighter. The TIE Bomber is very much a dedicated bomber. The TIE Scout is a long-ranged reconnaissance vessel. But the Xwing can kind of do all of those roles. Might not be as maneuverable as a TIE LN, the standard Imperial TIE fighter. It might not have the same punch as a TIE Bomber, and it has similar range to a TIE Scout, but ultimately, because it can do all of those things, it's very versatile. So it's a very versatile, very powerful fighter. So now we've established that. Then I think I want to move on to how it fits in the Alliance starfighter pool. So the Xwing is sort of at the higher end of the Rebel Alliance starfighter inventory. So you can split the Alliance fighters into sort of two categories. The first is sort of surplus vehicles that they've stolen or had donated or acquired through various means. So these are going to be Clone Wars era military surplus that would be bought by sector and planetary defense forces after the Clone Wars, things that the Empire was willing to let go of as they introduced newer, more effective models. At the higher end of this heap, you're going to have things like the Y-Wing, and the Y-Wing is very capable. It served very well throughout the Clone Wars. It's heavily armed, it's heavily protected, it has a hyperdrive, but it is not very good against other fighters. It is much more of a bomber than a fighter. So obviously the X-Wing might not have as much firepower as a Y-Wing, but it's still very, very useful because it can do sort of a little bit of everything. Now at the higher end, you have custom-designed fighters in the Rebel inventory. So things like the A-Wing, which is a dedicated space superiority fighter. Now, the A-Wing does have a hyperdrive, which does give it a sort of long-range capacity, and it is intended to take on enemy starfighters specifically. That is its only mission. So it's faster than an X-Wing. The two are broadly comparable maneuverability-wise, but the X-Wing is heavier armed. And then you have, at the extreme high angle of firepower, you have the B-Wing. And the B-Wing is well armed enough that it can pose a significant threat to something even the size of sort of enemy corvettes and frigates. It has a lot of anti-capital, anti-ship firepower, but it's not as effective against enemy fighters necessarily, because it's very big. So the X-Wing within the Rebel inventory can kind of do all of these missions. You know, the B-Wing sort of being a Y-Wing replacement almost. The A-Wing being this interceptor that's more intended to defend enemy capital ship, or defend friendly capital ships from enemy fighters. The B-Wing that is intended to attack enemy fleet units. So the X-Wing can do all of these roles. It might not be as good at any of them specifically as these more custom-designed fighters, but it can do them all, which means in a lot of situations you would rather have an X-Wing. It's only later in the Galactic Civil War, you might hear the cat in the background, it's only later in the Galactic Civil War, as the Alliance gets more and more firepower, that it makes sense to begin employing large numbers of A-Wing and B-Wings. And, you know, in the early war, X-Wings are way too rare to use liberally, so you still see a lot of Y-Wings. But as the war goes on, you're able to replace the X-Wing, or the Y-Wings, with X-Wings, and then the X-Wing fills this sort of general purpose role within the Alliance Starfighter Corps. So it's very good at, or it's decent at most missions. It's very, very good in the space superiority role, and it can attack other targets. So it's a very, very well-rounded fighter, which you want if you're going to have generally fewer fighters and fewer capital ships than your opponent. So the X-Wing is ideal for the Alliance and the kind of conflict that they're fighting. So with the Alliance fighting this asymmetric war and needing ships that can carry multiple hats, this contrasts to the Empire, whose fighters are generally designed to do one role very, very well. So something like the TIE LN, that standard classic Imperial TIE fighter. This is a very, very good space superiority fighter. Now, it's not always used the best or flown by the best pilots, but at its core, it is an exceptional space superiority fighter. If you want to use a fighter to take down enemy fighters, a TIE fighter is about the best that you're going to see throughout most of the war. Now, later on, you do have things like the Interceptor that are introduced that are intended to gradually replace the earlier TIE fighter. They're faster, they're better armed, and this is designed in response to things like the X-Wing on the Rebel side. Then you have things like the TIE Bomber. The TIE Bomber is very good at delivering lots of ordnance to enemies of the Empire. Not so good fighting enemy fighters. It's quite slow and clanky, and it's not particularly well armored, well protected, or survivable. Then you have the TIE Scout, that is this sort of long-ranged vessel that can do these missions far away from base that other Imperial ships can't because they don't have hyperdrives. And so that's the standard Imperial fleet before you start seeing the X-Wing emerge. Later on, the Empire does begin introducing more capable fighters under the TIE Advanced series. And this culminates with the Defender project, which is intended to be this very, very lethal starfighter. The TIE Defender is almost the perfect fighter, and probably the best fighter of the Galactic Civil War era. However, it's incredibly expensive and really only built in limited quantities because the Empire basically skids away from that concept, as basically it's not cost effective for the missions that they're doing. It's better in the Empire's mind to have these specialist fighters rather than build something like the Defender. At the same time, it doesn't really fit with Imperial doctrine all that well. It's difficult to mesh with how the Empire is fighting their battles. So really, the Defender we can kind of ignore here because it's not a significant factor, although it is better than the X-Wing, pretty much in every way. So then you do have a number of Imperial ships that are designed in response to the growing capacity of the Alliance, aside from the Advanced series. These would be things like the TIE Interceptor, that is basically a regular TIE fighter, but much, much better at the shooty enemy fighters role. It's much faster. It's about as fast as an A-Wing. It's very maneuverable. It has a lot of armament. And then you have other weird projects like the TIE Predator that actually has these S-foils mimicking the Xwing. So the Empire has this sort of baseline, very, very good specialist designs, and then they introduce others. So as you can sort of see, hopefully, the big advantage that the Xwing has is that it has a lot of general capability. It can do most missions well enough to be useful and appreciated. And this means that if you're somebody like the Rebel Alliance, who is never going to have as many fighters as your opponent, the Xwing is an excellent addition to your forces. You want as many of them as you can possibly get. Meanwhile, if you're the Empire, the Xwing is a very, very worrying adversary. Because when an Xwing shows up, okay, not only can it engage our fighters and do very well, but it can also attack our ground installations, our space installations. It can attack our shipping in the area. It can do all of these things very well. So it poses, it's a sort of triple threat almost. Now, of course, the other big advantage that the Xwing has is its hyperdrive. The Xwing, because it has that hyperdrive, in contrast to most Imperial ships, which rely on capital ships and carrying vessels to get them places, the Xwing can just go. And if you don't have a lot of warships in your fleet, that is very, very useful, because your fighters are not tied to a specific base unless you sort of choose to. So when you sort of factor all of these things together, the Xwing being not the best bomber of the war, not the best fighter of the war, not the best scout, not the best whatever, but being competitive. And that's the big thing. It can't just do these missions, but it's competitive in those roles. And because of that, that's probably why it ranks so highly. The Xwing can literally, it's sort of all singing, all dancing in that sense. You might hear some chickens too. But, yeah. So that kind of is wrapping the video up. Just a few more things to go over. So when everything is put together, the fact that it is such a good vehicle in all these categories means that the Alliance can actually go a long ways towards overcoming the superior manufacturing and staffing capability of the Empire. The Xwing is filling multiple different roles, and all you have is one ship and one pilot, rather than this multitude of other designs. And not only is it fulfilling those roles, but it's doing pretty good in all of these categories. And it's because of that the Xwing is the dominant fighter of the Galactic Civil War. And just the best all around. Probably one of the best starfighters in galactic history. In fact. Okay, so that wraps up this somewhat convoluted episode of Ship Talk, interrupted by Frances the cat and her randomly playful mood. You might have heard her in the background. You might have heard a chicken. You might have even heard a cow. I don't know. I'm not a genius when it comes to this sound design thing. But if you did, mention it so I can feel a little bit bad about that. But yeah, let me know what your favorite starfighter is in Star Wars. Actually, let me know what you think the most iconic ship in Star Wars is, because I would be very interested to know. As always, thank you to the channel's wonderful supporters on Patreon. And sort of as a update, I should be making more videos coming out. I have a couple of videos in the works planned. I think I'm going to put this video out hopefully Monday, and then I'll put a video out again on Friday, I think. Because I and about half of the staff at my last job were just laid off. So while I am looking for a new job, I am going to be somewhat frantically putting out YouTube videos. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy the greater output that's coming up, and just expect it not to last. But, you know, hey, if a lot of people, if these videos suddenly catch on and bunches of people are watching them, maybe I won't need a new job. Not that that's going to happen, looking at current sort of subscriber numbers and view counts, but, you know, hey, a man can dream, I guess. That's also not like a cry for, like, financial support, like, thanks to the patrons, but that's not a join the Patreon and give me money because I was fired, poor me. I'm just saying, I was let go, and because of that, while I look for a new job, I'm going to have more time for videos. So hopefully you enjoy those. Not that I would complain if, you know, as I said, YouTube showed this video around, and others. But, you know, it is what it is. Let's, I'm going to wrap things up there, I think, because this is going to be sort of a longer video. But yeah, thanks for watching, yada yada yada. You know where all the links are, down below.